Night fell, and innocence died. Maybe you've heard an offhand remark that somehow felt like a blade to the chest. Maybe you felt judged, humiliated, or shoved down into a pit of disgrace. If you've ever been there, then you need to understand this. You've been pulled into one of the oldest plays humanity performs, one of the harshest rituals society uses to decide who deserves to exist. And what I want you to do here isn't to listen with your ears, but to listen with the coldest part of your soul, the part that tried to act okay, forced a thin smile, stayed quiet to let it pass, while secretly carrying a mark that lingered for a long time. Don't make the naive mistake of thinking shame is just a pure emotion. That's confusing the tool with the purpose. Shame isn't only an inner tremor, it can become a tool of social control, something like a social trial engineered to collapse your identity and destroy your standing inside the hierarchy. You see it at school, at work, on social media, even inside families, where sometimes a single "you really are" can weigh more than an entire long lecture. Understand what it really is, so you stop getting dragged around by reflex. Guilt targets your actions. I did something bad, but shame aims straight at your existence. I am bad. And it's the second sentence that makes people collapse, because it triggers the most primitive fear humans carry, the fear of being cast out of the tribe. Even if you live in a modern U.S. city, even if your life looks independent, your brain still carries that ancient fear of abandonment, of being excluded, of being seen as someone who doesn't belong. That fear is the invisible rope that keeps us inside the lines, and it's why shaming can become such a powerful instrument. When you're being shamed, the attacker isn't simply criticizing you. They're performing an act of status reallocation. They use hypocrisy to build a higher platform for themselves, while pushing you down into the feeling of disgrace. The hidden motive is often selfish, a hunger to be seen as superior, pure, and entitled to judge. They aren't truly looking for correction, they're looking for dominance. And this is where you need to stay awake, because instinct, the worst guide you have in a psychological battlefield, will urge you to do two things: explain or fight. Do you notice it? Every time you rush to explain, or explode to strike back, you're stepping into a sophisticated trap. The moment you react, whether through tearful justification or angry resistance, you've accepted the cognitive frame the attacker set. By trying to defend yourself, you quietly admit they have moral authority to judge you, and that their accusation matters. In Machiavellian terms, you've just handed power back to the person who attacked you. An explanation is sometimes nothing more than the ego's desperate attempt to negotiate survival. Useless when you're standing in a courtroom the other person built without your consent. When you try to defend the shadow, the parts Carl Jung called repressed, you confirm that you are accountable to their tribunal. And the cruelest part is this: you can speak correctly, truthfully, kindly, but someone who wants to bring you down rarely hears truth. They only listen for whether you wobble. So instead of charging into explanations or emotional counterattacks, there's something that sounds simple, but is the hardest thing. Hold your ground. Not cold rigidity, steadiness. A state where accusations drop to the floor and find nothing to cling to. When you don't give them a grip, the attacker's frame starts to lose force. And only then can you see something deeper. Every person carries a burning, dangerous energy buried under the shell of social performance. That energy is often mislabeled as weakness, and it is the pain of shame. This isn't just an emotion. It can become an invisible chain the collective uses to bind the individual, if you let it run your life for you. But here's what matters. The energy of shame is also a kind of psychological heat, and heat can be converted into momentum. That's the principle of psychological reversal. But I want you to understand it in a healthier way. Not to manipulate anyone, but to reclaim power over yourself. You might think the opposite of shame is pride. It isn't. Pride is a fragile shield. It's still dependence. It needs outside approval to stay alive. The true opposite is indifference, in the mature sense. Complete non-dependence on other people's scoring system. Indifference isn't numbness. It's refusing to put your human value in someone else's hands. When you no longer need other people's agreement to define your worth, the burning energy of shame has nowhere to land. Instead of being hijacked by fear of judgment, that energy gets rerouted into cold focus and into an armor that can't be pierced. And at the bottom of all of this is a deep engine, the craving for ultimate power over yourself. You can spend your entire life dodging other people's eyes, or you can live in a way where you look straight at yourself without your hands shaking. If you've ever wondered why a single sentence can make your heart race, your face burn, your mind go blank, that isn't because you're weak. The first strike in any social war always targets your biology. Humiliation isn't just an insult, it's a direct neurological attack. The moment those words hit, the amygdala, the primitive survival switch, takes control. Your system screams, fight or flight. But in the modern courtroom, the person who reveals the most emotional movement and predictability is the one who voluntarily forfeits the game. Your emotional outburst is the reward the attacker wants, because it confirms their power to destabilize you. The one who reacts is the one who loses, always, at least in the emotional game. So instead of only blaming yourself, dissect it. The core of most personal attacks isn't strength, it's a deep psychological weakness. A confession disguised as aggression. That's the mechanism of projection. Shame, simmering insecurity, unfulfilled ambition, or fear of being exposed as not competent enough. These are the ingredients of the attacker's own shadow. They aren't attacking you in the truest sense. They're trying to regulate their inner chaos by creating an object to dump it onto. Their need to weaken you is simply a desperate attempt to feel higher for a brief moment. Don't treat the attack as a personal insult. Analyze it like a clinical symptom of the attacker's deep structural cracks. When you achieve this distance, you make a critical shift. You stop being a victim reacting on instinct and become a cold, analytical observer. The observer doesn't panic. They gather data on weakness, motive, and pressure points. And right now, I want you to ask yourself something real, something painfully ordinary. How many times in your life have you made yourself the defendant simply because someone else needed a stage, needed an audience, needed the feeling of being right to cover their own insecurity? From here we enter the void, the phase where power doesn't come from action, but from absolute control over your own silence. This is the mirror of silence. But again, understand it as self-mastery. Ordinary people see silence as awkward, as an empty space that must be filled. But for someone learning to protect themselves, the void is a way not to be pulled into the loop. When you're insulted, when you're verbally attacked, sometimes the strongest action is doing nothing at all for the first few seconds. When an attacker sparks conflict, they crave a reaction, confirmation that they've touched your nerve. That's the core of the need for feedback. By staying silent, you completely refuse the role of opponent. You don't supply the emotional fuel their aggression needs to continue. Your silence shifts the room's dynamics. Instead of you carrying the burden of provocative words, the space you create hands the awkwardness back to the person who created it. You can keep your face calm, your eyes blink enough not to perform, and count slowly. Those 3 seconds can feel like an entire lifetime in a social confrontation because they give you choice instead of reflex. And now, in the middle of this journey, I want to weave in a natural prompt for you, the listener sitting alone at night. Have you ever had a moment where the instant you stayed quiet, everything suddenly flipped? Where you stopped being the one who had to prove yourself, and the other person started revealing their own haste? If you've experienced it, you can share it in the comments. No need to make it long, just make it real, because sometimes your story can be a life preserver for someone else who feels lost. After the void, the next step isn't striking back. It's psychological judo, in the sense of redirecting force. In tense dialogue, natural emotional reactions often become evidence against you. The principle here is this. Psychologically speaking, defense can sound like an admission, because when you rush to explain, you're accepting the frame they built. Instead of falling into that trap, convert the other person's negative energy into your advantage, through calmness and appropriate curiosity. An insult is not truth that must be denied. It's abnormal behavior that must be observed. The attacker is using you as a mirror to throw their fears, flaws, their shadow onto. They need you to accept a lower rank. Frame inversion, in a healthy version, means you put the focus back on behavior instead of getting stuck on words. You don't respond with long logic or rising emotion. You respond with steadiness and a question that opens a door. Are you okay? What's really stressing you out so much that you feel the need to say things like that? This question isn't meant to embarrass them. It's meant to return the conversation to where it belongs, their state and your boundary. There's another variation many people misunderstand. The amused agree, or agree and amplify. If it's true, even partially, you don't necessarily have to resist. But be careful. The goal isn't to act above them or shrink them. The goal is to proactively admit what you are learning, what you are fixing, so no one can use it as a hook to drag you around. When you tell yourself, yes, I have this selfishness, I've made those stupid mistakes, you're doing something incredibly powerful. You're integrating the shadow. And when you own a truth about yourself, it loses the ability to control you. You become psychological Teflon. No one can shame you for what you've openly acknowledged and are taking responsibility for in a mature way. That's internal locus of control. A lot of people think this tension only exists between you and the attacker. But in reality, sometimes it happens in front of the group, in front of eyes, in front of the surrounding silence. Human beings worship strength and control, and they tend to despise weakness and the victim role. So instead of trying to perform a perfect version of yourself, what matters is keeping your dignity. You don't need to play any games to win. You just need not to lose yourself. If others are watching, let them see one simple thing. You don't get pulled along. You don't demean anyone. You don't turn yourself into someone begging for approval. That alone is sometimes enough for people to understand who is actually out of control. And if you're facing people who repeat the same emotional attack patterns, people who love stirring chaos just to watch others unravel, the healthiest move isn't some option that sounds scary. It's boundaries. There's a concept from scripting, active non-existence. In real life, understand it as withdrawing attention from what doesn't deserve it. Don't look, don't argue, don't extend the exchange. Turn away, step out, change the subject, or end the conversation politely. Not because you're afraid, but because you're reaching for something more important behind it, your life. And remember, you can do this most powerfully when you have a safe place to return to, a trusted friend, a trusted adult, a school counselor, a manager at work, or a therapist. In U.S. culture, saying, "I need support," isn't weakness, it's maturity. In the end, every technique you learn, charm, tactics, or the art of gaining power, will collapse into meaninglessness in the face of a fragile soul, an ego full of holes. Where is the fatal weakness? It lies in the strongest socialization mechanism humans have: shame. Shame hurts not because it's the truth, but because you made a mistake. You voluntarily handed the key to your self-esteem over to someone else. When you care too much about what others think, you transfer validation power to the public. It's an exhausting transaction. The requirement for building the internal fortress isn't amputating a part of who you are, it's healing the part that's afraid of being seen. The most effective, most sustainable method is shadow work, facing the shadow in Jung's sense, through self-understanding. Most people bury selfish instincts, envy, and the hunger for absolute power in the shadow. That hiding creates relentless internal pressure. You have to enter that darkness with the lamp of reason and acceptance. When you name it and accept it yourself. Yes, I have this selfishness. I've made those stupid mistakes. Those things lose their grip on you. When you hide nothing anymore, no one can hurt you by exposing what you already know and are taking responsibility for. Your fortress isn't built from brick walls. It's built from cold truth about yourself. That's when you reach absolute freedom and unshakable power. If you still want a few concrete lines you can use, remember the spirit of cut like a surgeon, meaning concise and clear, not meaning to hurt anyone. There's a sharp script question. The who frame. Who are you trying to impress right now? You can say it in a safer, softer version while keeping the boundary. Are you saying that to solve the problem or to get approval? And there's another tool, the repeat command. Sorry, can you repeat exactly what you just said? Slowly, not to humiliate them, but to bring the conversation back under the light of reason. When a sentence has to be repeated in a calm state, people often hear how rough and unfair it sounds. Finally, there's a line that sounds kind. I know things are hard for you. You don't need to take it out on me. It'll be okay. If you say this, say it from real compassion. And if they continue, end it. Compassion is not permission. Then there's a principle many people forget, the definitive withdrawal. Once you've set the boundary, once you've said what needs to be said, withdraw. Don't message again to win. Don't stay to prove. This isn't weakness. It's the peak of self-control. You punish the negative pattern with your absence, taking away the biggest resource you own, your attention. And when you leave at the right moment, you protect what's most precious, your peace. Now we return to the philosophy of the shadow in the closing. You need to understand. The purpose of mastering these dark psychological tactics is not to become cruel for no reason. It's to equip yourself with defensive armor in a war that never ends, over power and resources. But the mature version of power is self-mastery. The power to choose, the power to refuse to sell your dignity for acceptance. We need to understand ego preservation. If you don't recognize that so much social behavior is driven by self-promotion and fear of being exposed, you'll be dragged forever into roles that aren't yours. You study dark psychology not to harm others, but to protect your light, your autonomy, and your peace from predators wearing the mask of moral superiority. But protection doesn't mean becoming ruthless. Protection means not enabling what's wrong, not letting shame define you, and not letting fear of judgment run your life. Unmasking the power of the Jungian shadow is meant to show you that real strength isn't in trying to be perfect. It's in mastering shame. The strategy is to work backward. Integrate the shadow. When you dare to look straight at your darkest parts, the most ruthless capacities inside you, and accept, yes, I'm capable of that, you reach psychological steadiness. And when shame no longer controls you, you become free to take risks, to lead, and to make hard decisions that people chained to hypocrisy never even dare to imagine. But remember, real freedom always comes with responsibility. You choose to build community and society with composure, boundaries, and disciplined compassion. Innocence is dead. The defensive mask has been removed. You used to be prey, passive, easily wounded, spending all your energy trying to anticipate the next strike. But after mastering the art of defense, you've completed the alchemy stage of endurance. You've learned that the foundation of power isn't avoiding pain, it's reading fear. And when you rise from that, what changes isn't that you become hard to approach. You become someone who isn't easily controlled. You're no longer prey being chased. You've become the invisible, sophisticated trap others willingly step into, in the sense that you're no longer easily lured into the old game. The next stage of power isn't defense, but the art of influence. And I want you to hear influence in its kind version. Influence isn't ordering people around. It's building a structure where other people's choices naturally lead to a better, healthier, safer outcome. This is the truth. Humans don't act only from reason, but from a basic craving, the need for control, and the fear of being used. When you step into the role of an influencer, you can use that in a constructive way, with transparency, with respect for autonomy, without turning others into tools for your ego. Loss aversion reminds you that people often fear losing peace more than they chase victory. So position yourself as someone who brings stability through consistency, not through threats. Validation hunger reminds you that everyone wants to feel important. You don't have to buy anyone's loyalty. You just have to be kind, fair, and praise what actually deserves praise. That's how you build community and society, through small actions that ripple outward. You now have a detailed map of the battlefield's weak points. Now begin converting that understanding into a tool for living well. This is the moment to turn understanding into absolute power, but absolute power in its most beautiful meaning. The power of self-mastery, the power to stop, the power to leave, the power to forgive yourself, and the power to choose to become the person you once needed when you were very small.